Thank you so much for speaking to Press Trust of India, Ms. Anderson. As we mark World Environment Day 2025, what do you see the most urgent global environment action needed right now?
I mean, the World Environment Day 2025 has a focus, and that is to beat plastic pollution. So obviously, I should really speak to you about that as the most urgent issue. But there are other issues, of course. But today and on the 5th of June, we'll be shining a light on plastic pollution, in part because this is what the world has asked for. They've asked for a way forward to end plastic pollution. No one, I've yet to meet anyone who is in favor of plastic pollution. Everyone wants a solution to it. And in part because it is entirely so simple and so solvable, and that we understand essentially what we need to do. And there's global commitment. I'm yet to meet a world leader who doesn't want to solve it, including, of course, Prime Minister Modi. So I think that there is an upswell of determination on ending plastic pollution, and that's what World Environment Day is all about. But I cannot, when you ask me the most important, I have to mention, yes, pollution, but I will also mention climate change as a very important priority. And of course, I will mention nature, protection, biodiversity, and desertification as really critical issues. These three areas are important, but on World Environment Day, we're focusing on beating plastic pollution.
Right. We are also approaching towards COP30. In COP29, you stressed for the need to increase access to cooling to protect human health, reduce inequality and poverty. You outlined some of the points from Global Cooling Pledge as well. What are UNEP's expectations from COP30, especially in the light of the urgent building sector emissions gap outlined in your March report?
No, thank you for that. And obviously, the Cooling Pledge is a voluntary group of countries that have come in and say, we get that in a heating world, there will be the necessity of more investments in cooling. And that cooling could be from modern energy, but it could also be by smart buildings and, of course, by smart city design. And all of the above are critical. And I think I'm sure you know, Madame, that when you walk on a street that has trees, you have a sense of cooler space than if you walk on an open concrete space. It's as simple as that. We've seen studies that just what we refer to as ambient cooling can bring down in the city by 7 degrees the temperature from extreme heat above 40 to below 40. And that is bodily much more pleasant. So that's on the ambient side. We obviously, of course, also want to see a step up in the construction and building sector, in part because we understand that nearly 50% of the infrastructure that needs to be built is still in process of being built. We are still building a lot. We are putting down the equivalent of a Paris a week in terms of new footprint, globally speaking. So we're building a lot, and that is obviously how do we then integrate that into building smart, building where we have breeze flows. In India, in the past, all buildings had an airflow. They were built in traditional buildings, of course, with that airflow, and you still see that in the older parts of some of your most beautiful cities, where you have that airflow that can enable a breeze to pass through. I'm not saying we should not invest in the third area, which of course deals with modern cooling, but how can we get away from the standalone, inefficient, hanging on a window air conditioner to something more district cooling or a better built construction where central cooling can be a function of the construction itself? We will be pushing this at every meeting, including, of course, at the COP, and continue to carry it forward as a critical dimension of investments in urban infrastructure for a sustainable future.
Thank you for the reference of India. That's very much insightful and easy to understand for the audience, of course. Focusing on India, India's urban development is booming, but construction emissions and energy use are still rising. What concrete changes do you believe should India prioritize in its climate roadmap before COP30?
So I think here, I mean, Part of it, of course, deals with, I mean, India is leaning in on a dimension of clean energy. So this is very good on a dimension of sustainable energy, but we really would like to see more public-private investment models. We've seen some very good things happening in some of the Indian states where the Indian federal state at the state level is coming in with state funding and matching that with private sector funding precisely to scale up. We've seen in India green bonds issued. This is very good and linked to sustainability-linked debt. India issued the first such green bond in 2023, and that allowed India to fund public sector green infrastructure. This is the kind of thing that is very interesting, and India is leaning into that new space, is proven to really underpin and invest and support resilience and growth. And on energy, how can we support consumers? Well, I think you have in India begun to roll out energy service companies and pay-as-you-go save models, or pay-as-you-save models, I should say. This is very interesting for energy efficiency in buildings. We're going back to the cooling dimension, because if we can save at the building level, not just at the apartment and the individual level, we can get much bigger bang for the rupee, I should say. And so that's a real opportunity. And of course, new design. If yes, I recognize that some of the design in energy efficiency, it can slightly raise the cost of a new building. However, it is gained over a very short period when you look at the reduced energy costs. And it's that we have to take into account so that we can encourage new architects, new construction, that inside the architecture, they take this on board. And on local housing, of course, which is a big issue across the world, how can we ensure that we can reach right into the area of informal and self-built housing, where it's about local financial institutions, but still in supporting through microfinance that these can be as energy efficient and as climate neutral as possible.
Right. Ms. Anderson, air pollution is a big issue in India. At recent WHO conference in Colombia, household air pollution was flagged as a major health threat. And household air pollution, as we know, kills millions annually and yet remains under prioritized. How will UNEP move from recommendations to pressure, particularly in rapidly urbanizing countries like India?
Look, for us, it's not for us to put pressure. We are a science organization that puts out the science and puts out the policies that countries may choose to adapt. And of course, that will generally raise a degree of understanding. You could call it pressure, but we are not an NGO that puts pressure. We are an organization made up of the United Nations member states. But of course, the reality is that we are seeing, and the WHO World Health Organization conference that you referred to highlighted some of these issues. And if we zoom in on India, we understand that we have a massive use of open fires, we have inefficient stoves, we have use of kerosene and coal. The issue really is about what would it take, and it needs to deal with agricultural burning. It needs to deal with some of the emission standards, both from vehicles as well as from industry and electricity production. And there, I think, how can we see phasing out, yes, of kerosene and unprocessed coal? How can we get, yes, cleaner biofuels? How can we, yes, move towards efficient technologies, and of course, move towards renewables? I think India is on the way, and I do believe, because of the sometimes very, very, very dire air quality that you have, that there is a strong desire, both by politicians, but very much by the average citizen, get this fixed already. And during COVID, all of a sudden, people discovered what the cause was, and they discovered that air pollution was not inevitable. that it is us who cause it. It's not caused by anybody but us, and therefore it is us who can solve it. And so I think that that is a reality and a conversation that needs to happen. We from UNEP will, of course, continue to make sure that there's an understanding on the science between what's happening in terms of the emissions and what are the policy shifts that could be done. But I'm quite sure that India knows that. And it is a question of getting a strong move in that direction, but it is urgently needed. India is not the only country that is suffering from this, I hasten to add. But look, there are other countries who have had this journey and they've cleaned it up. We all remember stories from 100 years ago about London fog. That was it. That was it, right? It was dirty coal, it was dirty vehicles, it was open fires, it was relatively poor people in London's East End burning unprocessed coal. That was it. Today, you will find clear skies every day. So this is something that we know what needs to get done, and it is hard to do, but it has to get done for the people of India.
Do you think China has also set an example at a global level as to how to deal with pollution, especially household pollution?
I think that there are many countries that are making that move. Look, we have all taken a journey. Every country has taken a journey, and so China has also had to take that journey. They're still on the journey, but it is true over the past 10, 15 years, we have seen a significant drop. What you in air pollution but it's a process. And a large part, they have large apartment blocks. Each apartment block had its own coal-fired furnace. I visited this when I was working on and phasing out all of this, and I visited these. They get blistering cold winters. And so you will need to heat these apartment blocks. And this, of course, moving from these very dirty standalone furnaces where each apartment, you were literally shoveling coal in the basement into this big burner that is heating the whole thing. Very dirty coal, very inefficient, and of course, massively dirty air. Switching out of that and switching out of high polluting vehicles. Obviously, there are no two-strokes and everything is largely electrified now in terms of vehicular traffic, at least in Beijing. This has helped a lot. And it's part of that journey. And I think each country is, they have less of agricultural burning that we see in parts of Asia. But nevertheless, yes, China is making those moves, as have other countries done before. And so we just need to speed it up because people are suffering.
Talking about pollution, ma'am, global health and environment, how do you think that global health and environment agendas can better be integrated, especially around pollution-linked diseases?
There, UNEP and our friends at World Health Organization, so my own organization, World Health Organization, have been working for years because, of course, WHO, the health people, they set the standards, and the reality is that 90+% of the world is living in standards with air quality that is worse than that which WHO set. So we are all breathing dirty air to one extent or another. So ensuring that we understand that air pollution impacts our lives and the lives of our children is very critical. We are seeing a forward march. It's very important that we don't there is a forward global march. There are some countries that are still very, very much struggling with this issue. But I think from our partnership with WHO has been, I would say, for the past 30 years, because, soot, we used to have acid rain. You may recall we had acid rain in Scotland, in Scandinavia, and it was from coal burning. This was in the 60s and 70s. Big move on because it was high sulfur content of the coal burning. These kind of dimensions, which are slowly disappearing across much of the world over these past 30 years, has been important. These were some of the highlights that we have shone a light on. Then, of course, soot and other black carbons that we inhale, very, very real and have a direct impact on climate change. And so understanding the connections, high sulfur fuels, very bad for acidity of the rainfall, etc., and therefore bad for the environment, but very bad for us, very bad for climate, dirty fuel, ditto. I think that kind of connection we need to increase. That's on the pollution side, but we also need to be very mindful around, we speak about the One Health. If we go back to, it's something like 76% of all infectious diseases originate in the environment, right? They can emerge amongst, in quote unquote, wild and not touched by human spaces. And whether it's HIV or whether it's malaria or whatever it is, these diseases, or many of the coronaviruses, etc., living in the wild spaces, and then with a transmission of a bat or a rat or whatever it might be, can move into domesticated animals or even into human population. We see the bird flu right now in the US. These are diseases that also deal with both the health aspects of human and the health aspects of the environment. It's a different issue, but intricately linked. The last point I want to mention this one is, we should think about nature as being the place where we heal. If you go for a walk, if you take a jog, or if you take your kids out to play, they come back happy. We are happy in nature. And I think if there's anything I've learned from India, it is that there is in the sort of ethos of India and the belief system of India, a deep connection and a love for nature and respect for nature. So how can we anchor ourselves in that? Most cultures have it, some have it deeply, because that can translate into care for nature and care for the environment. And I think that that is what the Lifestyles for Environment initiative of President Modi is part of trying to convey. How can we walk lightly in this world without having such a heavy impact? I think these are important elements to understanding our health and environmental health.
Right. Ms. Anderson, you mentioned about plastics treaty when we started this conversation. But the plastics treaty talks remain stuck in fundamental disagreements. How do you plan to build consensus ahead of the next round? And what minimum ambition do you think should countries like India uphold?
Look, I mean, first of all, the world agreed to have this negotiation. It also agreed to a very ambitious time frame, 2 years only. Remember, it took us 21 years to get the Paris Accord, COP21. And so, I mean, 2 years to get something, it's quite extreme, but that's what we agreed. And I was happy we agreed it. But I also knew at the time that it would be a little bit of a stretch. But the world has agreed to this negotiation, and we have come a long way. We have a chair's text that is called that describes the broad contours of what the agreement could look like. I think we are seeing a public demand for this. I think businesses want a deal because, globally speaking, if there's value in the discarded plastic, because you have to recycle it, you will want to collect it. If it is non-valuable, because there's no demand that you should recycle it, it will be trash. It's as simple as that. So how do we create a value for the discarded so that it's worthwhile collecting? In India, there's a lot of collection of many, many things, metals and glass and so on, textiles and so on, precisely because it has a value. You can make it into something else. Many of the plastics that we discard today do not yet have the value. So how do we get to that place? Yes, there are some fundamental disagreements, but I also believe that they can be overcome. A treaty has to be general enough that that it can combine very sophisticated economies with a developing country economy, and everybody can see themselves in the mirror of where they are, or a least developed country or a small island developing nations. So you have to find it broad enough that it can encompass everyone, because not everyone can do the high-end, sophisticated recycling, what have you. But it also has to be ambitious enough that it will actually lead to the solutions. And I think therein lies some of the issues. We are very much engaging with all member states. We just had a COP for some chemical treaties, and there we had a good conversation with the heads of delegations in an informal setting that I hosted. We will do another informal setting at a ministerial on the sidelines of the Oceans Conference in Nice, and a few other places. I know that in the regions, there will be regional consultations for Asia and Pacific. They will take place in Bangkok later in June. And so there are a number of settings of regional consultations, all informal, as well as some that will prepare for the formal meeting that will take place in August in Geneva. I have to say that I think there's goodwill from every side. What I'm asking of India is a huge plastic producer. India is also a source of pollution for plastic. And about 1/5 of global plastic emissions come from India, if we look at the numbers. So, but India knows this. And so I'm really asking for Indian leadership, while also understanding that India is a country that is still developing, and we don't want to leave anyone behind. And we want poorer segments of the population who have got access to smaller portions. This is the sachet problem. But we don't want to only sell things in big bulk that poor people cannot afford. So we need to go into this with an understanding of each market's specificity. And that's why I say the treaty has to be general enough that everybody sees themselves in the mirror, but also ambitious enough that it solves the problem. I think that we can get there, and I'm very much looking forward to strong Indian leadership to help us get over the threshold.
How hopeful are you for the August meeting?
So I'm often asked this, Madame, and what I always say is, I am always hopeful because I believe in the human goodness and I believe in the desire to change, but I'm also determined. And so with hope and determination, we can go a long way.
Right. My last question to you is, global treaties often end up with non-binding goals. Do you believe we need stronger enforcement tools, perhaps even legal mechanisms somehow, to hold polluters or governments accountable?
There was a little crackle. So do I
Yeah,
believe,
I'll
can you
repeat the
pick it up
question.
from there?
Global treaties
Mhm.
often end up with non-binding goals. Do you believe there is a need for stronger enforcement tools to hold polluters and government accountable?
So it's interesting, right? Because we at UNEP, we have some 17 treaties that we are hosting. And let me mention one that has nothing to do with pollution, but it deals with legal and illegal trade in wildlife, wildlife and fauna and plants, right? It's because of that treaty that you can't trade, say, rhino horn or elephant tusks, right? You can't. You would be arrested. And there are about 20,000 species that you can or cannot trade, and they're listed and all of this. It's an absolute binding, it's a crime if you do it, and so on and so forth. That was agreed in 1974 when the world decided that it wanted to go at it this way. It was also sort of an easy up-down. It's an easier. Yes, you can. No, you can't. Yes, you can trade tropical fish for your aquarium, but only these types. And no, you cannot trade so and so. But you need to get an export license if you're going to trade some of these things that are listed and legal to trade and so on and so forth. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is Montreal Protocol. We discovered in the late 70s that there was a hole in the ozone layer and that we were seeing chlorinated gases depleting our ozone layer. And so we said, these gases will be no longer deployable in our air conditioners by such and such a year. And everybody had to shift. That was clearly legally binding. I think that those treaties work and work well, but they are also quite targeted to specific issues. On the issue of, and we were able to find replacements for we still have refrigerators today, and what we're using different gases, right? So for example, climate change or for pollution, what are the alternatives? This is a conversation. What does reduce, reuse, and recycle look like in the plastic sector in India? Right. What does it look like in Gambia or in Burkina Faso or in Kenya from where I speak to you? Because it's different. Or what did it look like, I don't know, in my country of birth, Denmark? Because, it will be different in different places. And some places, and I'm seeing, for example, in India, when I used to be young and I travel in India, you get the little terracotta cups of tea when you're in the train. I still have some. And now, of course, you get them in plastic. But I'm seeing some interest in rediscovering and reinventing, if I can say, taking back, but maybe with a modern twist, a new packaging. I think these kind of opportunities are really there, but we will have to move together in that direction to make it happen. Legally and non-legally binding in a treaty is very normal. There will be elements that you agree to, that this is, we've got to get to it, and non-legally binding, we're building capacity, we're ensuring greater awareness. These are non-legally binding. Enforcement is not what we do as the UN. We don't come in and tell a member state, you can't do that, because we're made up of member states. Enforcement happens at the national level, and a broad treaty is often simply made reflected in national law, and then is up to the national legislation to make that happen. And each treaty gets implemented differently in different countries, because my little country of birth, we have very high wind, and so it's all about investing in wind energy. That might not work in other countries, but so all the incentives goes towards wind, whereas in other countries, maybe it's on-roof solar or whatever it might be. So I think we need to understand that a treaty has to be broad enough to encompass everyone with clear targets. At times you can have enforceable mechanisms, but they often are enacted at the national level.
Right. Before we close, Ms. Andersen, what will be your message to the world this in Environment Day?
So since the theme is on plastic, the message is absolutely clear. We can and we must beat plastic pollution.